In a war between two neighboring countries, some cities are of serious strategic importance. These cities are usually located on or near the borders of the country being fouled. This is why the Russian army has focused on Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast to invade Ukraine. Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast is undoubtedly one of the most important cities in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Bakhmut has the importance to change the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war. For this reason, the conflicts in Bakhmut are constantly increasing in Bakhmut, where conflicts have been going on since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. The Russian invaders had become unbearable against the Ukrainian army in June. Russian leader Vladimir Putin did not want to leave the strategically important city of Bakhmut, but he could not find soldiers to fight. Unable to solve the true problem. Despite mobilization order, Putin deployed the Wagner Group, a private military company, to Bakhmut in June. Wagner Group was also insufficient against the Ukrainian army's power. Wagner Group has lost tens of thousands of soldiers in Bakhmut since June until today. This time, Putin took an irrational decision. According to this decision, prisoners in prison would be free if they fought in development for 6 months under the Wagner Group. Putin's move also failed because the Russian occupiers in Bakhmut were insufficient against the Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger every day. Last day, the Ukrainian army targeted strategic points in Bakhmut that would change the course of the war. The Ukrainian army blew up the supply routes and bridges through which the Russian invaders were delivering troops and ammunition to Bakhmut. Let's analyze this critical development in Bakhmut together. The Ukrainian army repelled the Russian invaders in Bakhmut with a series of attacks. Russian invaders in the west of the city were forced to leave the region. The Ukrainian army gained control over a large area of Bakhmut with air and ground operations. The Ukrainian army is very early in the west of Bakhmut has spread to a large area. Russian leader Vladimir Putin's dream of expanding into Ukrainian territory through Bakhmut has been shattered on its social media account. The UK Ministry of Defense described what happened in Bakhmut as follows. In the city center, the Bakhmut River now defines the front line. Ukrainian forces hold the west of the city and have destroyed key bridges over the river, which runs from north to south along a 200 meters, 800 meters wide strip of open space, with Ukrainian troops firing from fortified buildings to the west. This area has become a killing zone and is likely to make it extremely difficult for Wagner's forces to try to continue their frontal assaults to the west. Bakhmut has become a killing zone for the Russian occupiers. The Russian invaders who were able to suppress to certain parts of the city, thanks to the bridges over the Bakhmut River, will no longer be able to go beyond the eastern region with the destruction of the bridges. It is likely that the Ukrainian army's next offensive will be east of Bakhmut because the Ukrainian army maintains its determination in Bakhmut. Bakhmut was the main topic of the meeting organized by the Ukrainian High Command recently. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny and Ukrainian Land Forces Commander Colonel General Alexander Skirsky made statements after the meeting. According to the decision taken, the operations in Bakhmut should continue, and the presence of the Ukrainian army in this region should be strengthened. Some law commentators argue that the fighting Bakhmut, a devastated city, is pointless because the city is almost completely destroyed. They argue it would be of no benefit to either side to capture it. But Ukrainian officials argue that if Bakhmut falls, Russia will be able to advance eastward. Russian leader Vladimir Putin suffered a major setback with the destruction of the bridges and supply lines in Bakhmut. Because Putin had the idea of occupying Bakhmut and expanding into Ukrainian territory. With this in mind, Putin invested months in Bakhmut. The Russian army lost most of its nearly 200,000 soldiers in Bakhmut, so much so that U.S. officials announced that 30,000 soldiers belonging to the Wagner Group were killed and wounded. Almost all of the soldiers of the Wagner Group were stationed in Bakhmut. Wagner Group's decline in Bakhmut is not limited to these Ukrainian attacks. The boss of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, shared the bodies of mercenaries in Bakhmut in recent weeks. Prigozhin claimed that his soldiers died because the Russian army did not provide Wagner Group with enough weapons and ammunition. Before Prigozhin's post, it was revealed that he did not get along with Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff, because Sergei Surovikin, the chief of General Staff before Gerasimov, was a close friend of Prigozhin. Prigozhin, who could buy as many weapons and ammunition as he wanted from Travkin, grew stronger in Bakhmut and announced that he had captured Soledar without the knowledge of the Russian army. These developments drove a wedge between Prigozhin and the Russian army. Recently, Prigozhin made new statements. Prigozhin announced that all communication with the Russian government was cut off. The reason for this was that he asked the government for weapons. Prigozhin wrote the following on his Telegram channel: to prevent me from asking for ammunition. They closed all private phone lines in all offices and units and blocked all accessory institutions responsible for decision-making. Now, I will only be able to ask for more through the media, and I will most likely do just that. Yevgeny Prigozhin has become very famous in Russia for his work in the occupation of Ukraine. This gave Prigozhin power poisoning. Prigozhin claimed that all the work in Bakhmut and Soledar belonged exclusively to the Wagner Group. He turned against the Russian army, the soldiers of the Russian army on the front line, and the soldiers of the Wagner Group have also become at odds. The Russian army's internal problems are also growing. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is experiencing power poisoning, has also started working to take part in the state administration in Russia. After Russian leader Vladimir Putin, according to allegations, Prigozhin made a deal with Chechen leader Kadyrov and started initiatives to take part in the post-Putin government, so much so that Kadyrov allegedly passed confidential information to Prigozhin. All these developments revealed an important fact: even Putin's closest friends believed that Putin would fail in Ukraine and leave power. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is losing ground every day in his invasion of Ukraine. The losses of the Russian army approach 200,000. The mounting casualties have completely shaken the Russian public's confidence in Putin. Almost all Russians believe that Putin will fail in Ukraine. The people are constantly protesting for the end of the war, but Putin is willing to risk the death of hundreds of thousands of Russians for his own power and career. One wonders what Putin will do in the coming days, as he is getting exhausted day by day. Do you think the Russian army and Wagner Group troops will withdraw from Bakhmut after the strategic offensive of the Ukrainian army? Have the USS Ukraine success in Bakhmut? Will the conflict between the Wagner Group and the state affect the course of the war? The war in Ukraine intensifies as Kiev launches the summer offensive. Offensive operations of the armed forces of Ukraine take place in the eastern and southern axes. The main focus of the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces is the complete recovery of southern Ukraine. When southern Ukraine recovers, Kiev troops will be able to focus on Crimea more easily. The cities of Melitopol, Berdyansk and Mariupol need to be liberated in order to focus more comfortably on the Crimea. In addition, in recent days, when counterattack operations have gained momentum, Ukrainian forces continue to carry out daring attacks on strategic areas. As is known, cutting the enemy's logistics is a classic strategy. If you hit valuable targets, you can neutralize the only advantage of the Russian army, namely its mass. The other day, partisans blew up the Russian-controlled railway bridge near occupied Melitopol. Russian troops used the bridge in the town of Yakimivka to supply weapons from the Crimea. It was noted that the bridge serves as part of the arms supply artery from the Crimea to the Zaporizhia region. Mayor in exile, Ivan Fedorov, said that this explosion blocked an important Russian logistics route near occupied Melitopol in Zaporizhia Oblast. According to Mayor Fedorov, Russian forces lost 5 freight cars and a 50-meter railway line as a result of the explosions. Mayor Fedorov reported that the explosion occurred at the most opportune moment when a train carrying stolen ore was on the track. Explosions regularly occur in occupied territories as local Ukrainian partisan movements targeted Russian authorities, collaborators, and Russian military equipment. While Moscow generally blames Ukraine for such incidents, Kiev does not take responsibility for the explosions. Also on June 11th, an explosion occurred on the railway tracks in the Kirovsky district of Crimea. The explosion occurred around 4 o'clock when a freight train was passing through this section. Preliminary information shows serious damage to the infrastructure of the railway line. Making a statement about the situation, Crimean President Sergei Aksyonov said that the train traffic in this section stopped due to the explosion. By whom and how the explosion was carried out, it has not yet been disclosed to the public. This part of the railway was used by Russian soldiers to transport military equipment. At least 6 explosions were heard near Russian-occupied Melitopol in the Zaporizhia Oblast last week. According to Mayor Fedorov, 5 explosions were heard in Melitopol. The explosions caused heavy smoke in the north of Melitopol. At least one explosion was also reported on a railway in the Dalnygorsk district near Melitopol. Russian forces used this railway to transport military equipment and personnel. The biggest purpose of the Ukrainian armed forces attacking the railways is to disrupt Russia's supply lines. Another stopover point for the Ukrainian attacks is Berdyansk. Berdyansk is a port city on the southern coast of Ukraine, on the coast of the Sea of Azov. The port city has been occupied by Russian forces since the first days of the conflict. Berdyansk had previously been targeted by Ukrainian forces. The city is located on the coast of Mariupol, a region believed to be among the places that Ukraine will try to retake. In its counterattack, a large cloud of smoke was seen rising from the port area in the Sea of Azov. Russian state media outlet RT stated that there was loss and destruction in the attack, whose precise target was not immediately clear. Rogov speculated that the attack may have been carried out with British Storm Shadow missiles, a long-range cruise missile with stealth capabilities that the United Kingdom had recently supplied to Ukraine. Berdyansk is about 100 kilometers from the front line deep in Russian-controlled territory. This means that using Storm Shadow missiles would be a possible option. As is known, Ukrainian forces have recently started using long-range Storm Shadow missiles, which can hit targets deep within Russian-occupied areas. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov stated that all Storm Shadow missiles launched by the Ukrainian army on May 28 hit their targets. On the other hand, the purpose of the attacks of Melitopol and Berdyansk is to soften the land route to Crimea. So what's going on in the Crimean Peninsula lately? Sergei Aksyonov, the so-called head of the Russian administration in Crimea, reported that an unmanned aerial vehicle attack was carried out on the temporarily occupied peninsula on the night of June 14-15. 9 UAVs were registered on the territory of the Republic of Crimea. Aksyonov claimed that 3 of the unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by electronic warfare, and 6 unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by air defense forces. In addition, the direction of the Ukrainian attacks was diverted to the Russian radar station in Crimea. A Russian radar station used to control Ukraine's southern coast and most of the Black Sea was damaged and temporarily occupied Crimea. Satellite images of a Russian radar station located on the Tarkinka Peninsula on the western coast of Crimea have emerged, as reported by the Crimean Partisans Telegram channel. The pictures show a hole in the dome of the station. In fact, these are the eyes that control the entire southern coast of Ukraine and a significant part of the Black Sea. Destroying these eyes would mean significantly weakening Russian troops, aviation, and air defense. On the other hand, the Russian army strengthens the Crimea against Ukraine's counterattack. Satellite images are emerging. According to satellite images, it was seen that the Russian army has built several defense lines in Crimea from the administrative border of Ukraine to Jankwi. These images provided by Planet Labs provide a glimpse into Russia's strategic military maneuvers on the embattled peninsula. The footage shows that most of these trenches were dug by the Russian army after its withdrawal from Kherson. Satellite images of the northern part of Crimea show a striking pattern where Russian military positions are often set up near villages or even in settlements. According to Ukrainian Armed Forces officer and Crimean investigative journalist Yevhen Dashin, this strategy is in line with typical behavior of the Russian army. The new trenches prepared to defend the Crimea are located near the village of the checkpoint in Armyansk, the town of Krasnoperekopsk, and around Jankoy. As a result, counter-offensive operations are moving in Ukraine's favor. It looks like the attacks on the front lines will intensify in the coming days. The performance of Moscow troops in the face of these attacks will paint a clearer picture of the course of the war.